Hello, greetings, and welcome. I'm Brien Posey, and in this video, I want to give you a preview of a project that I've been working on, and I also want to show you some techniques that I've been using to shrink the size of a PowerShell codebase. So what is this project? So for about the last 15 years, I've been using a collection of a few different applications to run my writing business. And the thing about it is, none of these applications are ideally suited for what I need them for. I'm making them work, but the experience could be better, let's put it that way. So for a long time, I've been toying with the idea of creating my own custom application that does exactly what I need it to do, as opposed to trying to force an application that really wasn't meant for what I'm using it for to work and serve my purposes. And I'm building this application in PowerShell. Now, I can't go too much into the specifics of this application for security and privacy reasons, but as you can imagine, this application is absolutely huge. It involves thousands of lines of code that I've written so far, and it's not even done yet. So one of the things that I've been doing is to try to look for ways of shrinking the code base, just to make the code a little bit more manageable and easier to follow and debug as I'm developing it. So the one area of functionality within this application that probably has more bloated code than anything else is the graphical user interface, because GUI interfaces by their very nature are code intensive. So let me show you a quick example. The script that you see here is an early experimentation with creating an interface that would allow me to enter writing assignments. And I'm not going to go into all of this code, but I just wanted to kind of step through this at a very high level, because the first thing that we're doing is we're creating a form, and a form is essentially just a window that appears on the screen. So the next thing that we have to do is to define all of the different graphical objects that we're going to use and then attach them to the form that we've created. So for example, right here we have a label. A label is just text that appears on the screen. Here we have a drop-down list, and then we have another label, and then a date picker. I'll talk more about that one later on. We have another label, and then there's a combo box, and then yet another label, and it just goes on, and you can see how much code there actually is, and all we're doing here is just building a graphical interface. The script doesn't actually do anything other than just display a test interface. So the script that I just showed you only creates the GUI elements for a single pop-up. You can only imagine how many GUI elements I've had to create over the course of the entire application. There were hundreds of them. And all of those GUI elements take up a lot of space within the code base. So I've been looking for ways to shrink the code. So I want to show you two different techniques that I came up with. So the script that you see right here was my first attempt at shrinking the code base for the GUI application that I just showed you the code for. And if you take a really quick look at this, you can see that the script is indeed a whole lot shorter than what I just showed you. So here's this code. That's the whole thing. And then just for reference, let's look at the one I just showed you again. So there is a big difference in the size of the code. So the idea that I had with this particular script was to use a ForEach loop, and I would use that loop as a way of automating the graphical interface creation process. So let's just take a really quick look at how this code works. So the first thing that I'm doing is creating the form. You can see that block of code right here, and this is identical to what I just showed you with the other script. The next thing that I'm doing is I'm defining an array, and this array consists of the various fields that I need to display on this pop-up. So we have customer, and then progress, due date, priority, cost, word count, and notes. And in the actual application that I'm writing, there turned out to be quite a few more fields that I wanted to include. As I said, this was an early prototype. So the next thing that I'm doing is I'm creating a variable called y-axis, and I'm setting that to 20. And the y-axis is going to represent a position on the screen, 20 pixels down from the top of the screen. The next thing that I have is the ForEach loop that I mentioned. So here we have ForEach, and I'm looking at for each item within fields, and fields was my array right here. So for each one of the items that's listed within the array, there are certain steps that we're going to perform. So let's take a look at what those steps are. The first thing that I'm doing is I'm creating a label object. So this is just a very basic label creation, and I'm setting the label's text equal to $item, which happens to be the field name defined within the array. And then at the end, I'm adding the label to the form. Simple enough. Then once the label has been created, I'm creating a text box to go with it because I need a field to go next to the label. So we're defining the text box in this line of code right here, and then we specify the text box location on the screen. I'm setting the text box width, and then I'm adding the text box to the control. Now, one thing that I want to point out is that for the position on the screen, I'm taking advantage of that y-axis variable that I showed you. So the label is going at position 10, y-axis, which y-axis is set to 20 currently. So the label is going 10 pixels from the left side of the screen and 20 pixels from the top of the screen. Then for the text box, I'm using this right here. The x-axis is going to be 150 pixels from the left side of the screen, and once again the y-axis is going to be 20 pixels from the top of the screen. Then just before I end the loop, I am increasing the y-axis by 40 pixels. So the y-axis started out at 20 pixels, so then the next iteration of the loop, the y-axis will be set to 60. So then at that point, we're going to create the label at 10, 60, and then we'll create the text box at 150, 60. Then when all of that gets done, I create a submit button at the bottom of the screen, and this button doesn't actually do anything. I'm just creating a button that I was using just to kind of get a feel for how I might want the interface to be laid out. And then the very last line of code causes the form to be displayed on the screen. So let me go ahead and run the script so that you can see what it looks like. And so this is what the script produces. And so you can see all of the labels right here, 10 pixels from the left side of the window. And then you can see the text boxes that were created 150 pixels from the left side of the window. And that y-axis variable ensures that everything is spaced evenly. And the nice thing about this technique is that because I used that for loop, I didn't have to manually create all of these labels and all of the text boxes individually. That very first script that I showed you, the really long one, I created each and every GUI element individually, and that's why that script was so long. So this is certainly a shortcut to creating a GUI interface. Now, this is great, but there are a couple of problems with this script. So let me go ahead and close this out, and I'll show you what those problems are. The first problem that we have is that in order to interact with a GUI object, we need to have a unique name assigned to that GUI object. So for example, I've created a series of text boxes, and if this were an actual application, data would presumably be entered into those text boxes. The problem is there's no way to retrieve the data from those text boxes because every text box that we create has the same name, $text box. So whenever we create a new text box, it overwrites the name of the old one. So we don't really have a way of interacting with the data that gets entered into those text boxes. That's by far the biggest problem that this script has. But there is one other problem associated with the script. If I run the script again, you can see that a text box isn't necessarily the best option for some of these fields. So for example, here we have a priority field. It would probably be better to have a drop-down list where I can choose a priority than to have to type in a priority. Likewise, the notes field, we have a single line of text right here. It would probably be a lot more effective to have a great big text box where I can enter multi-line notes. Likewise, we have a date due field, and I could type in a date right here, but it'd be a lot better to be able to just pick a date. So the interface works, but it's probably not the best layout for what I'm trying to accomplish. So with that said, let me go ahead and close this out, and I want to take a look at another script. Now this is the script that I showed you a moment ago, and as I explained a moment ago, the reason why this script is so long is because I created each and every GUI object individually. So all of those text labels you saw, each one of those was created individually. So for example, this block of code right here, it took all of this just to put the word cost on the screen. Likewise, all of this code right here was required just to put the words word count on the screen. So we have a lot of code to do, not a lot of work. Now the upside to the script is that we have created some other types of GUI objects besides just text boxes and labels. You can see that one of the objects that I've created is a numeric up-down. So this type of field looks like a text box, but it has a number in it, and you can use buttons and increase or decrease the number. As another example, for notes, rather than just having a single line text box, I've created a rich text box. And if I scroll up a little bit, you can see that I've used a combo box for the priority, and I've populated that combo box with values such as low, medium, high, and urgent. And if I scroll up some more, you can see that for the date field, I've used the date time picker. So what that does is if I click on the box, it will actually pop up a calendar that allows me to pick a date and time. So functionally, the script is a lot better than the one that I just showed you, where I shortcutted the script by using a for each loop. However, it does involve a lot of code, and my whole goal was to shrink the code base. So before I move on, let me just show you what this looks like. Now, at first glance, this looks really similar to what I showed you a moment ago. But if you take a look at the customer field, we now have a drop-down, and if I click on that, we can choose from various customers. We also have a drop-down for the progress, and you can see the various phases of the project. So I could set this to not started, for example. So here I have a due date that's pre-populated, and if I were to click on the down arrow, I actually get a calendar pop-up that allows me to pick a date. Then I have priority, and again I've got a drop-down box, and I could choose the priority. I could set this to high priority. Then I could enter the cost, I could enter the word count that's required for the assignment, and any required notes. So as you can see, this is a much better script, but unfortunately the code is rather lengthy. Now before I show you the third script, I just want to point out that this third script really isn't any shorter than the script that I just showed you, but keep in mind, this is just one pop-up out of an entire application, and that application is requiring me to create hundreds of GUI objects. So even though this particular script isn't necessarily any shorter than what you just saw, in the long run, it will save a lot of work and reduce my code base substantially. So here's the script, and before I show you how this script works, let's go ahead and switch back to PowerShell for a second. And I just want to run the script. And you can see that the script does exactly the same thing as the one that I just showed you. So I just wanted to show you that there's no difference in functionality. The only thing that's changed is the script structure. So the script starts out with a function. I'm going to skip over the function and go down to the script body. So here's the main body of the script, and the first thing that I'm doing is creating a form, exactly like what you saw in the other two scripts. And then the next thing that I'm doing is I'm creating a nested array, and this nested array will actually determine how the GUI objects are created. So the array itself is called GUI definitions, and then each row within the array contains data related to one specific GUI object. So some of this data is the same for every GUI object that we're creating, and some is unique to a particular object. So for each GUI object, we have a control type, and you can see that this one is set to label, meaning that this particular row in the array is going to create a label object. Then we have a name for the object that's being created, in this case customer label. Then since we're creating a label, we need some text to put in the label, so here's the text. Then we have location XY, and this is going to determine the positioning on the screen. So the next several objects that I'm creating are labels, but let me scroll down a little bit. Here's an entry associated with a combo box, so you can see that the control type is set to combo box. Then I provide a name for the combo box object, and again I've got a location X, location Y that will determine the placement on the screen. And then here you can see the items that are being pre-populated into that combo box. Then down here I'm doing the same thing for the date time picker, so I've got control type equals date time picker, and once again I've assigned a name, and then I've assigned a location X and location Y, and then I've assigned the format that I want the date time picker to use. So that's basically what I'm doing with regard to this array. So every row within the array stipulates how a particular GUI object is going to be created. So if I scroll down a little bit, you can see that I've got a for each loop. So I've got for each $item in GUI definitions. So GUI definitions was my array. So for every row within my array, what I'm doing is I'm calling the create GUI object function, and then I'm passing that row up to the function as a parameter. So let's take a look at the function. Now it's worth noting that I'll probably eventually break this function out into a separate module, just so that I can isolate it from the rest of the code and make the code a little bit easier to edit and debug. But for right now, this is what I've got. So here we have the function declaration, and then we've got a parameter, and that parameter accepts one object. It accepts a row of data, and it treats that row of data as an array. So then what I've got is a series of variables that takes the individual items within the array, and it just puts it in a format that's a little bit easier to work with. So for example, instead of having to use $row.minimum, I've just created a variable called minimum. It's just a little bit less typing, and it makes the code a little bit easier to read. So then if I scroll down, I've got this line right here, create $ plus global plus object name plus equals new object system.windows.forms plus control. So you're going to see a lot of this sort of thing. So the problem that I had when I was developing this particular function is that I've got to be able to assign a unique name to each GUI object that I'm creating. Remember, if you don't have a unique name associated with a GUI object, there's no way of interacting with it to get data into it and out of it. So I needed a unique name, and the only way that I was able to do that is by essentially creating a variable. In this case, the variable is called $create, and then from there, I'm building a string that forms the command that I will use in order to accomplish whatever it is that I'm accomplishing. So in this case, $create is going to be pointing to $global, which means we're treating this as a global variable, plus object name. Remember, we're passing object name from that array, so this is going to be the unique name that's being assigned to that object, and then equals new object system.windows.forms plus control. So what we're really doing in this command is we're constructing another PowerShell command, and that PowerShell command creates a global variable bearing the name that we specified within the array, and that new object that we're creating is going to be of type system.windows.forms, and then whatever object type we passed through the array. Because remember, within the array, we had some objects that were designated as label objects, we had other objects that were designated as combo boxes, and so on and so forth. So these two lines of code right here can create any type of GUI object that we need, and it ensures that that GUI object receives a unique name. So then we're doing something very similar right here with regard to the XY location. So what we're essentially doing is determining that the object that we're creating is going to be positioned at a specific spot on the screen. Then we've got a whole bunch of other parameters. When you work with Windows Forms, you'll find that a lot of the different objects that you can create have very similar attributes. Things like colors or fonts or things like that. So rather than defining colors and fonts and sizes and that sort of thing for every single object we create, what I'm doing is I'm taking a very simple approach. If a particular attribute is listed within the array, then I have some code that will take action on that attribute. If not, then the whole thing is skipped over. If I can go back to my array and take a look at the very first line, we're defining the control type, the name, the text, the X location, and the Y location. So those are the attributes that we're passing to the function. So the function is certainly set up to handle those attributes, but there are some other attributes that the function can handle that aren't listed here. For example, this particular row within the array doesn't use color. Some of the other ones do, but this one doesn't. So let me go back up to my function, and you can see that I've got a section right here related to color. So I have this one line right here. If $color is not equal to null, then execute this script block. So in other words, if I don't define color in the array, then the color variable is going to be null and no action will be taken. If on the other hand I do define the color within the array, then the color variable is not going to be null, it's going to contain an actual color, and then in that case PowerShell is able to apply the color attribute. So what I've really done here is I've created a function that can handle a wide variety of GUI object related tasks. So that way I'm not repeating any code unnecessarily, and I can create just about any type of GUI object I need to using this function. Now, are there GUI objects that I haven't defined in here? Yes, I'm sure I'm going to be building on this in the future. But for right now, this particular function is able to create a wide variety of GUI objects. As you saw in my demonstration script, I wasn't just using text fields, I was using other types of things like date pickers and combo boxes and things like that. And this one function was able to create the GUI objects for every bit of that. So that's just a technique that I've been playing around with regard to making my PowerShell scripts a bit more concise. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm Brien Posey. Thanks for watching.